Hi, welcome to the second session for the course Life Science for Educators, which is part of the Bachelor of Education Honours Program. In today's session, we're going to look at cell compartmentalization and also the use of an analogy for the cell compartmentalization. And because we're using an analogy, I think it's important that you understand the importance of analogies in teaching. And this is what this short video is all about. It will highlight how you can use analogies in teaching and also show you how to map analogies, which will be important for the first assignment that you're going to be submitting. So in the preparation videos, I did show you the video for the cell analogy as a factory, but I'm just going to show you a short excerpt from that now, just to refresh your memories.
Hi friends, welcome to biologyexamstory.com. Today the topic of our discussion is cell analogy, example cell compared to a factory. So this is a summary of comparison of cell as a factory. Cell wall in the case of plant cell can be compared as a surrounding outer boundary wall. Cell membrane can be compared to guarded gate where guards will check and allow certain members to pass through. Cytoplasm is the entire area of the factory, whereas nucleus is the MD's office or chief executive officer's office where all instructions or decision making center. RER is the site where products or proteins are made and further modified, whereas Golgi apparatus is the site all these proteins are properly addressed, sorted and dispatched. And dispatching method is by using vesicles or small packets that is properly addressed at Golgi apparatus. Mitochondrion is a site where energy is produced or ATP is synthesized for all activities of the cell. Lysosome is a waste disposal site. It can be called as an incinerator. In the case of plants, there is a kitchen or food producing center, that is a chloroplast, where photosynthesis takes place, where light energy is converted to glucose, and that is used by all organisms in the universe. Hope things are clear. Thank you so much for watching. You are with biologyexamstory.com.
So firstly, I'm going to go through defining an analogy, explaining how analogies are good models to use, and then after that, we will look at how to map an analogy. So I'll break this part up into two parts. Firstly, defining what an analogy is and its usefulness in teaching. And then we will look at mapping the analogy using the eye and the camera analogy as an example. Okay, I'd like to look at the use of analogies in teaching of life sciences, particularly by looking at this analogy of the cell as a factory. Are very important in terms of the kinds of knowledge that a teacher has. So that fits into my research focus, which is pedagogical content knowledge, and it includes the most useful forms of representations of those ideas, the most powerful analogies to use, illustrations, examples, explanations, and demonstrations. So in other words, to say the ways of representing and formulating the subject that make it comprehensible to others, particularly the learners. Okay, that is what Schulman says. So the analogy is important in helping students understand, but it also helps develop their reasoning in science. So analogical reasoning is a precious tool for expanding human knowledge, and it has played an important and undeniable heuristic role in scientific history. For example, Kepler used it for explaining planetary motion, the model of the atom as a solar system. So both that teacher knowledge and reasoning in science is what makes analogies helpful to help learners grasp new facts and abstract conceptions if they are presented in terms of the learner's own experiences. So an analogy draws on the learner's past experience, and that is why it is a valuable tool in teaching. Now, what is the basic definition of an analogy? Analogies are non-literal comparisons between superficially dissimilar knowledge domains. So we're drawing a comparison from two different knowledge domains. For example, the domain of everyday experience, or the domain of work in terms of the factory, and the domain of science or biology in terms of looking at how the cell functions. So an analogy is a correspondence in some respect between concepts, principles, or formulas that are otherwise dissimilar. So I mean, a cell is very dissimilar to a factory, for example. But more precisely, it's a way of mapping similar features between those concepts, principles, and formulas to help students understand the abstract concept you're trying to deal with. So an analogy implies that there must be a resemblance in some way. There must be an agreement or likeness between the things that we are comparing in some way, even though those things are obviously different. So the resemblance and similarity may be external or superficial. So the cell, for example, functions as a complete unit to produce things that the body needs. A factory also works as a unit to provide some resource that we might need to use or some product that we can use. So that's where the resemblance is. Now, that resemblance may be so strikingly similar that we can reason from those similarities, and that from that likeness, in certain respects, we can infer that other and perhaps deeper relations exist. So analogies provide an explicit comparison between one area of knowledge and another area of knowledge that is completely outside of the first. So biology is completely outside the world of technology and how a factory functions. Now, analogies are also models. So an analogy is a kind of model, but all models are analogous. So a ball and stick model of a molecule is an analogy for an actual molecule, and it's a model of a molecule. Models are simplified representations of objects or processes. So you must remember that your analogy is a simplified representation of what is actually happening in the cell. Now, where models and analogies are useful in teaching are that if the object is too big, such as the solar system, objects are too small and cannot easily be seen, such as the cell, processes that cannot be easily seen directly, such as digestion or erosion, abstract ideas such as the particulate nature of matter, and analogies are useful in teaching. So in instructional settings, analogies help bridge the gap between an idea that you're trying to teach them and direct personal experience when that idea cannot be readily gained from experience. So learners don't have access to the electron micrographs. They can't see the cell functioning, but if they understand how a factory works, then you can help bridge that gap in helping them to understand how a cell functions. Analogies may cause visual thinking to occur. Okay, so already you've got the cell, which is a visual, you've got the diagram, but now you're helping learners make links between the parts of the cell or the cell organelles and the aspects of what's happening in a factory. So they think of the cell as this living, moving thing in which something is produced and it's controlled from a control center and so on. Analogies can lead learners to see a relationship in terms of a picture, and it will enable them to compare and contrast various levels of abstraction and generality. So they can see the abstract ideas, they can make generalizations. Analogies provide an explicit comparison between one area of knowledge and another area of knowledge that is completely outside the first. As I said, cell biology, now we're looking at the factory, which is technology and the world of work, but it will help learners understand how a cell works through that comparison. Okay, so you've seen how analogies, which are usually very dissimilar to the thing that you're trying to compare, you've seen what the definition is and how they can be used. So because they are so dissimilar, it's very important to map out the analogy, starting with your concept that you want students to learn, and then you need to use the analogous structures and you need to map them out. You also need to ensure that you let students know where the analogy falls short. So the next part of the video shows you how to map out the analogy. Please pay close attention to how this is done, because this is going to be your first assignment for the course. Now, how one should use analogies in teaching. Okay, it's very important to do this. So when you are teaching with analogies, first thing, you must introduce the target. Say, okay, this is the cell, this is your target, this is what you want students to understand. Then you cue the retrieval of the analog. We're going to look at it in terms of a factory that is working. Then you must identify the relevant features of the target and the analog. For example, the nucleus, it's the control center of the factory. The cell membrane is the fencing around the factory that allows people to come in and out, the same way the cell membrane allows things to pass in and out. So you must identify the relevant features of the target and the analog. Then you need to map the similarities. Like that video did, it mapped the similarities between the cell components and the factory. Then you have to draw conclusions about the target. So in other words, just like the control center controls everything happening in the cell, the nucleus does the same. You must also indicate where the analogy breaks down. So where does this analogy not hold true? Where does it not work in understanding the target? So there is the map for how you can map the analogy. You've got your analog concept, your target concept, list the features. So I'm going to use the example of the eye and camera analogy. So the eye is often compared to a camera. You've got your retina, your lens, your iris. In the camera, you've got your lens, your aperture, and your film. Analogy. Okay, again, first introduce the target, the eye and how the eye functions. Cue the retrieval analog, the camera. Okay, what are the similar features? The lens to focus light. In the eye, the lens and cornea does that. The choroid prevents reflection. The camera has dark inner linings. The eyelid protects the eye. You have your lens cover. Your iris, which admits light, which is similar to the aperture. The retina is like the film. Then assess the differences. And also the lens actually moves, whereas in the camera, it's just by bending of light. Then in the eye, we have cellular rods and cones for seeing the image, whereas in the camera, we have the chemical change in the film. So address those shortcomings. So this analogy does not address binocular or stereoscopic aspects of human vision, and you can evaluate the new representation. So that is mapping the analogy. Okay, so I've shown you how to map the analogy. Now, as you can see, I've included a diagram that shows a labeled cell, and in brackets next to that are the different analogous comparisons for the cell. So what you need to do is taking this analogy of the cell as a factory. I need you to map the analogy. I need you to indicate where the analogy falls short and basically provide me with about 2 pages, including your mapping, where you map the analogy. So you will find this assignment up on the assignment tab on Ulwazi. So yeah, if you need to go back and watch the video and make sure that you map the analogy properly. I want to see what the analogous structures are with the target structures. I want to see the conclusions drawn in terms of the functions. And then I want to see where the analogy falls short and things in the analogy that are not addressed. Good luck for the assignment, and that's all for this video. So until next time, see you soon.